Are you ready for a future shaped by Bitcoin and AI? In this episode, I'm joined by Dr. Richard Petty, a futurist who's lived at the crossroads of economic scholarship, AI innovation, policy advisory, and entrepreneurship. His story reveals a profound paradigm shift sparked by Bitcoin, bringing fresh clarity to money, trust, and technology in an interconnected world that's heading toward an abundant future. And keep watching to discover the mental shifts that define your place in tomorrow's digital economy. All right, let's dive in. All right, Dr. Richard Petty, welcome to Bitcoin for Millennials.
Very happy to be here. Hi, Bro.
Hi, man. I'm very happy you're here. I think you are one of the most interesting people that I've met in the past year. So I'm happy you want to bless me with your time and my audience, of course. So you have a few decades of expertise in like economic scholarship, AI research, policy advising, and of course living in China for I think 25 or more
30
years.
30 years.
30 years. So. Yeah, maybe to start, maybe it's a big question, but how did like all those experiences shape your way of looking at the world before you encountered Bitcoin?
I think all the experiences combined to inform a worldview that's very different to the one that I would have had even 10 years ago, certainly 20 or 30 years ago growing up. So I grew up in Sydney, in the western suburbs of Sydney, started work there in the 1980s. And then came to Hong Kong and China and started working here in the 1990s. And I've been here ever since. My background really, as an academic, I've got a business background and an academic background. So I started a company in the 1980s, which was or is completely unrelated to anything I do today. But you learn lessons from everything that you do. And so it was very helpful in that regard. And then I did a PhD in the 1990s, several degrees, but culminating in that. And the focus there was on how to measure things, in particular looking at intangible assets, human capital, measurement models for that, predictive algorithm modeling back in the early days when people weren't talking about that so much. And then started investing, been investing for over 30 years, broadly. So I'm a TradFi guy, I guess, is what I'm learning. I'm referred to as. I'm one of those. And really, I'm very fortunate to come across a whole lot of interesting people doing what I do. So these days I sit on a number of boards around the world. I write books. I invest. And so I do a lot of different things which are interesting to me and keep the days full. Mean that I travel a lot and meet a lot of interesting people like you and some mutual friends of ours and others. In terms of your podcast and Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and everything in that world, I started learning about that. Well, I guess I first heard of it when I was in New York in 2013, 2014. And I spent some time with some guys who were then invested in Bitcoin, which was pretty interesting. And I was completely dismissive of what they were doing and what they were thinking. All the usual objections that you'll have heard many times and your listeners will be very, very familiar with. And then over time was disabused of those otherworldly notions and tried to leave behind the archaic thinking that had really infected me about fiat and about all the traditional macroeconomic and microeconomic fundamentals that I'd learned and I'd taught and I'd written about and studied very intensively and had used as the foundation for investing for 30 plus years. And had done very well in doing that, financially and otherwise. That was great. But started to realize through conversations with those people in the early days, and then more recently with friends like you and some other friends we know, started to think more deeply and reflectively about cryptocurrency, about Bitcoin in particular, about blockchain, and about the new economy.
Yeah. What I really enjoyed seeing, I mean, we met in Las Vegas, right? We were also with our mutual friend Richard Byworth. That's how we know each other. And I remember Richard saying, I've been nudging Richard, for a long time, and I'm happy he came to Vegas just to see this and learn. And it really, I really saw like you having an open mind, just like diving head first, like really, maybe also like back into this, right? Like you said, you heard about it before, you kind of like dismissed it, but I feel like in those 2 days you were, just viewing a lot of talks. We were discussing it, and I remember that we were sitting at a dinner. You were sitting next to me, and you really had like this aha moment where I don't even know what the discussion at the table was, but I think I remember you saying something like, "I can't believe no one is paying attention to this," or like no one in my world, right? Like I think that back then you referred to like the academic world. Like you said, like, oh, I work with so many PhDs and even Nobel laureates, etc. Why aren't they thinking about this crazy discovery that all these people at the table are so enthusiastic about and so deeply interested in and knowledgeable about talking about? And maybe that's just my question. Like, can you kind of like share what went through your mind? Because I really feel like that was a moment where something clicked and you realized, hey, I've been looking at this from, I don't want to say a wrong point of view, but from a point of view that kind of limited you to seeing that. And like you said, that point of view has helped you tremendously throughout your career, right? And I find that very interesting, like those moments where you just realize, hey, there's another way of looking at this, and that actually opened your mind.
I remember the conversation very well. I wasn't drinking, and I think you might have been, so perhaps my recollection is better than yours. You weren't drinking much if you were. I think my views were poorly informed. They weren't uninformed, but I just hadn't, we all get busy day to day and do other things. So the other hat I wear a number of hats, but I spend a lot of time on AI and invest in AI and have been writing about AI and benchmarking AI in different countries for many years. So the reason I think people in my world haven't had the epiphany yet, and that I'm confident many will, it's much the same as I see in the parallel world that I work in of AI, or the world I spend a lot of time in, where people are busy, they're doing what they do day to day, they have busy lives, they hear about it, they read about it, they see a headline, and they reflect or think about it. It might come up in dinner conversation, but it doesn't go much deeper than that. And so I think the conversation we had was along the lines of, there are some really intelligent people we both know who are completely dismissive of the new economy, the new rails. They're beholden to the mindset that fixes on the banking system as it presently exists, the monetary policy as it presently exists, the implementation of fiscal policy over the last 5-10 years in particular, the functioning of the stock markets, and it's a legacy mindset which just hasn't moved on and hasn't shifted. And you mentioned our friend Richard Byworth. I credit Richard with a lot. He's been a great friend of mine for many years, and he saw this really early. And Richard has a background in traditional banking too, at a very senior level, and is a super smart guy. In fact, I think you've had him on your podcast as well. So he's educating everybody. He's not just educating me. But Richard had spoken to me many times, and I think was probably quite frustrated about my lack of buy-in early on. And I was buying in. I bought in, I sold a few times and made the mistakes that other people do. I certainly wasn't looking at Bitcoin or crypto as a long-term hold back then. It was more something to dabble with and to understand. But I think that's why it's passing much of the world by right now. It's explained by the fact that, people have other things to do and they're consumed by their daily lives. So unless you're in the space and unless you're spending time with the people that we spend time with every day, having these conversations, and unless you're invested in this, and that's important because if you're not invested, you're not measuring it, you're not managing it, you're not looking at it, you don't really have that buy-in, then you're probably not thinking about it all that deeply. And a lot of the mainstream media gets it wrong, in my opinion. They get a whole lot of stuff wrong. not just this. They get a lot of stuff wrong. But, buying into the narrative that they propagate is really dangerous for a whole lot of people.
Bitcoin custody is evolving, and OnRamp is leading this change with multi-institution custody, eliminating single points of failure. Instead of relying on one institution, OnRamp secures your Bitcoin in a cold storage multi-sig vault backed by 3 independent custodians, where no single party can move your funds alone, providing an unprecedented level of security. Your assets are protected by a 100 million Lloyd's of London insurance policy, with all transactions fully auditable on-chain and only executed at your direction. This means complete transparency and control over your assets at all time. Beyond custody, OnRamp provides comprehensive Bitcoin services that include trading, lending, inheritance planning, and IRAs. You can view them as your private Bitcoin banking partner tailored to your wealth preservation goals. Whether you're new to Bitcoin or an experienced holder, OnRamp's approach helps you secure your generational wealth with unmatched security and peace of mind. You can sign up at onrampbitcoin.com and use code BRAM, that's BRAM, to receive $150 in Bitcoin after your first deposit. If you first want to learn more, you can also book a free consultation via their website to speak with one of their Bitcoin custody experts. Tell them you came through me, and they'll take extra good care of you. My American friends, I've got something for you. If you're into Bitcoin, you want to grow your stack in any way possible. What if you could do it effortlessly just by spending your fiat? The Gemini Bitcoin credit card is designed to help you do just that by giving you instant Bitcoin rewards on every purchase. Just use it like any other credit card and earn back up to 4% on transportation, 3% on dining, 2% on groceries, and 1% on everything else. There are no annual fees for this card and no exchange fees to receive your Bitcoin rewards. Sign up to get your limited edition Bitcoin Orange credit card and earn a $200 Bitcoin bonus when you spend $3,000 in the first 90 days. You can find more information and terms in the description below, or go to gemini.com/Bram to sign up today and start stacking effortlessly. That's gemini.com/Bram. I feel surprised that many intelligent, diligent, academic people that, from my point of view, would love to discover new things that change the world are totally dismissing Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is profound on many different levels, right? Like from the technical to all the things that emanate from having something that is absolutely scarce that can also function as money, right? Like, what does that do within a society or psychologically, like all these things, right? So there's these multiple dimensions within Bitcoin that I think are deeply profound and still, and make this rabbit hole really deep, basically, right? Like, I mean, I've been studying for 10 years and I also don't understand it fully. And that, again, for me has been a signal like, wow, okay, that this is even something bigger than the conclusion that I've made, basically. And so that keeps me interested and curious also to learn more and follow and well, try to discuss and share and reflect with other people. And I think that when you mentioned that too, I thought that was actually interesting in the sense that you then also realized, like, hey, why aren't these people paying attention? And I agree, it is because people are doing their own thing, obviously. But now that you've seen it, how do you look back at all the things that you've done before, basically? Because it is you could call it like a paradigm shift in the sense that once you see it, you cannot really ignore it anymore. So how does that feel for you, having had obviously a lot of success in the previous paradigm that you were acting in?
Let me anchor on the word curiosity, because I think that's the key to all of this. It's not having a myopic view, not being so entrenched in or bought into what you've done previously and believing that you're infallible, or that what you've learned previously is in absolute terms correct. Being malleable in thinking and being able to pivot. And I suppose that's probably, look, I've worked outside of the university system where, at times I've been, as a professor, an employee of one university or another. My career has been spent primarily working for myself as either an advisor or a consultant or an investor or a business owner. And what that allows you is the freedom to think for yourself. And also the fear that you might get it wrong. And, in my case, I've got it wrong many, many times. But fortunately, it's never been fatal. So, in fact, I think we talked about you've just got to get it right more often than you get it wrong. And part of the ability to do that is this discovery and the learning that comes from immersing yourself in conversations and ideas that are at the forefront of technology and the forefront of education, the forefront of the financial system, the forefront of everything. And if you're there and you're locating there, you start to think big. And the bigger you think, the more ideas you have and the more cogent they become. And also, for me, the more implementable they become. So that's certainly happened. But I think for me, the time we spent together in Vegas was a bit of an epiphany or certainly an awakening, because at the same time I was with Richard, Byworth. I was with a whole lot of other people that we know who were, big names in the field and very knowledgeable in the field. I'm a member of YPO, and I was with the YPO guys, many of whom are US YPO guys and are pretty connected and early into the industry and super knowledgeable, switched on, successful people. And I just sat and listened and tried to learn. And that's I was very, very fortunate to meet some of the biggest names in the industry pretty early on, and they were kind enough to explain to me the fundamentals and then give me reading lists and give me podcasts and give me, I got a whole list from you, and I'm about halfway through that. But I'm a long way, I am at least halfway through that. But I think it's you've mentioned your journey's 10 years. It's a never ending journey.
When you then kind of like compare this academic thinking versus perhaps out of the box perspective thinking that Bitcoin requires, that seems like such a big shift apparently in practice. But in my mind, they are actually very, they should be very close.
Yeah, I think what sums this up for me is people who are intellectually arrogant, and in the academic world, there are a lot of people who haven't really earned the right to be as intellectually arrogant as they perhaps are. Maybe that applies in life, but that's a real failing. And if you have a closed off view and you're not open to being data driven and fact driven, and looking at this in objective empirical terms, then it's going to be to the folly and the long-term regret of many. And look, the party is pretty early. It's not like all the champagne's been drunk. There are still a few open bottles, but the party's certainly started. And people. I reflect on that because somebody said to me at lunchtime today, "Am I too late to join the party?" And the answer is,
just arrived. Yeah.
The answer is no. You're not. You're very, very far from being late, because I think what's going to happen is most of what people forget that the Industrial Revolution, we're less than 200 years on from that. So let's call it 150 years. Really, post World War II Reconstruction is the modern financial system as we know it, and many would say it's post the gold standard of 1971, or the abolition of the gold standard in 71. So what's that? That's 54 years that we've really been operating in a banking and financial system and a Federal Reserve fiat, printing system of the kind that we're presently in, and that's not a very long time. And I think people, again, become accustomed to things continuing the way they always have, and that's absolutely not going to happen. Whether it's Bitcoin, I feel, by the way, even more strongly about that in terms of artificial intelligence and the work I've seen there over the past 10 years in terms of health, education, transportation, the environment, lifestyle factors generally, work very broadly, you name it. That people perhaps aren't as aware as they really need to be for their own good and for the future.
I think our whole idea of what money should be, what value is kind of distorted by this fiat money system. And that's something I wanted to ask you, because obviously, you have a traditional monetary and economic education. That's what you use to look at the world. What kind of like new perspectives have you gained from seeing Bitcoin now, like on trust or governance, or what money should be or what value is? Like, what are new things that you've learned that are kind of different than what you thought you knew before?
I think just before we go there, in terms of the weddedness people have to the existing financial system and to fiat, a big part of what explains that is user bias and experiential bias. The reality is, for most people, they've only known the fiat system. They've only known, I earn $1, I spend $1, I bank $1, and it's worked for them, and they're used to it. So change is difficult, particularly if you're in a profession that doesn't really have an intersection regularly with the financial system, the economic system, other than getting a paycheck, because your skills are in other areas. Maybe you're a health worker or an educator or whatever, or a taxi driver, whatever it may be. You're not driven to think very deeply about the flaws of the financial system. So I think for many people in our world, or in a traditional finance world, and certainly for me, a big wake-up call was COVID. And then looking at what happened during the COVID period, because there was time to very deeply read and think and consider what was happening, and rethink and retool. And actually, I wrote a book, or I co-authored a book during that period about the new economy or the future economy. So I spent a lot of time researching and thinking about this. And it's undeniable to my mind that the economic system as we have known it for decades now really isn't working, hasn't been working for some time, but it's functioned well enough that people have been largely oblivious to that fact, or have been able to get by without really acknowledging that fact. A lot of people talk about the printing of money, quantitative easing and QE, and the fact that during COVID and just after, in a 2.5 year time frame, roughly 40% of all US dollars in circulation were printed. That is a massive increase in M2. And when you massively increase M2, what do? You get price bubbles, you get asset bubbles, you get rampant inflation, which is what we've seen. And entirely predictable, but also unsustainable for the longer term. So then the thinking goes to, well, if that isn't working and what we're doing is perpetuating that, because you can go back to the GFC, the global financial crisis of 2008 into 2009, and then even before that, the other financial crises that happened intermittently. And what's the response been? The monetary response has been the same, and the fiscal response has been the same. It's been a case of print money to try and buy our way out of it, and fiscally go and create jobs and support the labour market and so on by spending money and taxing or reducing taxes, as the case may be. And is that a sustainable model into the future? Can we just repeat, rinse and repeat ad infinitum? And I think many people are realising that we can't, or that's not the best way to be doing it, and that the new financial rails, the blockchain provides the technology, and on that rests the cryptocurrencies, and Bitcoin in particular, which is a much longer term proposition. And alongside that, you have the gold bugs who've been probably since 1971, many of them, and certainly in recent times, believing and saying what we're talking about now in terms of the financial system and the way in which it's broken or should be improved and is unsustainable. And it's part of the reason that explains why this year in particular, both Bitcoin and gold have done so well. It's that increasingly there is an understanding that the existing financial system doesn't cut it, and that for the long-term needs of many, it's going to debase and devalue their assets and their wealth. So where do you go? And gold's been the traditional safe haven, and then younger generations in particular, who are perhaps more technologically facile and literate, feel more comfortable with Bitcoin. And I think the other interesting observation there is that when I meet people who are much younger than I am, like you, Bram, who perhaps haven't lived through some of these cycles, that's a blessing and also a curse. So it's an enabler of what's happening in the cryptocurrency world and the adoption of Bitcoin, because there is a lack of awareness by default or by age of what's happened before. And the good thing about that is it doesn't hold you back. It means there's faster decision making, and that it's like a blank page. You look at the blank page and you try to reconstruct and think, well, what makes sense to me as someone who's a smart, like you, a smart educated person, and you work off that. Whereas people like me, many of them are earning a lot of money through the old system. So you don't want to give that up. Moving to the new system, you're seeing other people make money, so there's a bit of FOMO there. Mm-hmm. But if you're in the old system and you're doing very well, making that transition is very hard. So really, that's I think the crossroads we're at. Yeah. Is this intergenerational wealth shift and this intergenerational understanding of what's worked and what will work in the future and what hasn't worked in the past.
Yeah, I agree. I also think, Bitcoin for me is the solution for the problem I'm seeing, the root cause that I've identified, and on which I base my individual future outcome, right? And so I do think that the people that have been into gold see the same problem. They see the same root cause. Their possible solution is something different than what I'm choosing, and that is obviously fine. They have their reasons. I have my reasons, right? But I think a lot of people actually skip the root cause analysis and the possible options, discernment, dissection, however you want to call it, right? It's more like, okay, I have a problem, and I want to fix it. Is basically, how many people think. But in order to get the problem, especially when you've done really well in the system that you eventually should identify as being the problem, right? It's just really hard to, I'd say, acknowledge the fact that maybe you were lucky, right? Or you weren't as good as you thought you were, right? And I think those things are things that kind of push people away, because that could be uncomfortable, right? Like, oh, I was successful in a system I didn't really understand. Oh, was I really the actor in all the things that I achieved, or maybe there was a lot of luck involved? Well,
I think you're always the actor, but the question is, will you the screenwriter and the director and the producer at the same time? And
exactly.
For most people, for many people, that wasn't the case, right? It's the vagaries of luck have helped and hurt many in the past, and I think that's changing too.
I think that is what I think is interesting to identify, that once you see Bitcoin and you also see that other people don't see it, that is the actual opportunity that is in front of you. So like you said, if there's a person who says oh, am I too late, this and that, no, the fact that you're thinking about it is already further than probably 99% or 95% of people that are just total oblivious to the problem that is really there.
Yeah, one of the underpinning assumptions of traditional economics, of course, is the rational actor, and that self-interest. A rational actor will be self-interested, but I think increasingly the issue for many people is understanding what self-interest really means. Because if you don't know how the game's being played, it's self-interest. The self-interest is win the game. Win the game. But if you can't see the moves being made on the board and you don't know what the rules are, then self-interest itself is a problem.
If you want to self-custody your Bitcoin stack, I recommend the Blockstream Jade Plus. I've been using this premium Bitcoin-only hardware wallet for a few months now, and I love its design and ease of use. What makes it stand out is its open source hardware and software, and Blockstream's unique genuine check, which makes sure that your device is authentic. No backdoors or compromises. You can connect with the Jade Plus however you want. Bluetooth, USB-C, or you can go fully air-gapped with its built-in camera for cable-free QR transactions. The metal case feels solid and the color screen is easy to read, and it connects with your favorite Bitcoin apps like Blockstream Green, Sparrow, and Electrum. Get your Jade Plus today at store.blockstream.com and use code BRAM to get 10% of your entire order. Let's talk about something a lot of people don't think about before it's too late. Where are you storing your Bitcoin seed words? Are they truly secure? I found my solution with Stampseed. They now offer both 12 and 24 word titanium plates, so whether you're securing a hardware wallet or a multi-sig setup, they got you covered. Your seed phrase gets permanently stamped into pure titanium that withstands fire, survives water, and lasts for generations. Unlike shallow etching methods, Stampseed's patented tools help you to deeply stamp every letter for permanent readability, protecting your financial legacy. Their new kit includes test pieces for practice and is compatible with both the 12 and the 24 word plates. Paper seed phrases are a disaster waiting to happen. Secure your Bitcoin with Stampseed for decades to come. Go to stampseed.com and use code BRAM, that's BRAM, for 15% of your order. Well, that's what I mean, right? So it's almost like unconscious self-sacrifice, but still thinking no one is taking advantage of that. That's what I sometimes think, that people are just like, oh yeah, but it works for me, so why would I even question it? But yeah, just not realizing that there are other people that profit from the fact that you are so ignorant, basically, right? And
it's going to work. It's going to work for most people until it doesn't. And
yeah, exactly.
And if you haven't, a lot of people aren't planning for that. This is the real fear that I have. I was speaking at a futurist conference in Dubai a week or so ago, and I was asked a question during the conference about what's really going to happen in the future, and it was in relation to AI, but I think it applies more broadly. And what I'm seeing, I spend a lot of time in the R&D labs with big companies doing AI, and in particular in a few of the industries that I think are more interesting, certainly to me, but relevant to humanity into the future. And I said words to the effect of, it's a bit like the Hollywood movie where everyone's standing on the beach and there's a really, 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 really big wave in the distance, and it's rolling in, and people are standing on the beach. And you'll know the trope, the sort of Hollywood shtick, and people say, "Oh, look, that looks like a really big wave. Is that coming towards us? Oh, it might be, but it's a sunny day, and oh, catch the ball." All these other things are going on, and the wave's getting closer and closer. And hey, honey, do you think we should cut and run? Oh, we'll be okay. It's probably not that big. It just it gets closer and closer, and by the time they realize it's a tsunami. And it's going to be a complete wipeout, and people turn around and start to run, it's too late. And the people who realized when they saw the really, really, really big wave in the distance, which is a small fraction of people, they've been cutting and running, 20 minutes ago, and they're already 3 hills beyond, and they're safe. And I think this goes through my mind often, because it's the compression. Somebody was talking to me about technology, and after the conference, and it was a professional in their 20s, and they were very smart and very capable in terms of what they're doing, but they were asking me about fax machines. And so I started to explain that when you think about technology and the evolution of technology, when I was growing up, I can remember before we had microwaves and before we had fax machines, let alone really the adoption of the computer, certainly the internet. I can remember being at my desk and hearing there's a thing called email, and trialing that out for the very first time. And but the point I was making is that these innovations happened in a temporal sense. They happened with big gaps in between. So you would have time to absorb the innovation and the technology and incorporate it into your life, and then have time to think about, oh, that was great, what's next? And then incorporate that. These days, it's so compressed and everything is happening and changing so quickly. Most people don't have the time to do that.
Yeah.
This is what I do full time. And a lot of days I despair at the notion that I'm falling behind. I'm really falling behind. I've got a stack of AI and crypto related stuff that I need to know yesterday, and yesterday is behind me, let alone what I need to know now. Yeah. And I think that's that's a huge challenge for all of us.
Yeah.
And people really, in terms of, particularly if you have kids, you need to think about this in terms of your children, in terms of educating them and directing them, or guiding them at least, in terms of what life is going to be like in 10 and 20 years.
Yeah. I think that's a nice bridge to AI and Bitcoin, right? I've had a few podcasts in the past weeks where we really talk about this convergence. Is that also something that you are seeing? I mean, you've done a lot of research with AI. What kind of relationship do you see between the future effects of AI and this Bitcoin system that is coming up, that is a fully decentralized trust system? Are they compatible? Do you think they collide? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I absolutely think they're compatible, and I think they go hand in hand in terms of evolving over the next 5-10 years, and probably beyond that into the future. So I think it's a new way of living, a new way of doing most things, and a new economy that goes on the rails of Bitcoin and crypto and blockchain underneath that. But I'm fixating a bit on the word threat that you used in your remarks a moment ago, because what occurs to me is that the threat, for a lot of people in the past, if they didn't adopt the mobile phone because they were worried about potential effects of cancer or a microwave, whatever it may be, the effects of that were largely inconsequential, right? So being 6 months late, a year late, 2 years late to get a mobile phone, no big deal. So what? Your friends during that period, you're harder to get. Leave the message on the answering machine. You want to boil eggs instead of heating them up in a microwave? Do that. That's fine. So there might be a minor efficiency argument that could be built into productivity and efficiency into that rubric, and thinking about those parameters. But it's far, far more consequential now if you're not across the changes in AI, and if you're not across cryptocurrency, if you're not familiar with Web 3.0, if you're not engaging with this and learning about it actively and trying, you don't have to make big bets. Just be involved. Just instead of watching endless TikTok videos on whatever it may be, unrelated topics, focus it on this for a period of time. Go onto YouTube, and there are plenty of videos, some of them very good, that are educational, that take you to the next step and the next step, and then start to play around with it. Because I think that for many, many people, they're going to be displaced, and their lives are going to be disrupted in ways that they haven't really imagined. And there's a reimagining of roles, there's a reimagining of the economy, there's a reimagining and a reconstruction of pretty much everything we're doing right now. I was with a longevity specialist a few days ago talking about what's happening in terms of the longevity space. This was particularly in relation to Alzheimer's disease and the prevention of dementia. But then we got into a broader conversation about organ replacement and a range of other things that in the longevity space are advanced, very, very advanced, far more advanced than most people, including myself, would realise. But people at the cutting edge who are doing it day to day know it's happening. And he was saying to me, look, I think there's a really reasonable prospect that within 10 years you'll be able to now, regulatory issues aside, by ethics aside, right? But you'll be able to take the cells, your own cells, and generate organs and replace organs as they fail. And so in terms of the velocity, terminal velocity in longevity terms, and how long someone can live for, if you can literally go and replace most organs. And he claims, it's his claim, I haven't verified it, that they're about 30% through mapping the brain and being able to generate or regenerate the brain, which is a far more complicated problem. But that's a further down the track. But if you can preserve the brain in longevity terms, and you can regenerate or generate new organs for an individual with zero chance of rejection because they're based on your own cells and your own stem cells when they're developing these organs in space, and they've got all the science. And then people stop thinking about a life expectancy of 80 or 90 for the average and start looking at decades and decades beyond that. What are the implications of that alone? What are the implications for what you do with those extra decades? What are the implications for how you fund those extra decades? What are the implications for the learning system that for most people stops when they leave university right now in a formal sense in their 20s, and for some people stops earlier than that? And apart from a bit of continuous professional development or lifelong learning that you might do in your workplace, for many people, they stop formal learning at that point, but you're going to live to 150, 180 years. Maybe we have to rethink that. You know, maybe you go to university in the form that we know it, maybe not in the form we know it, but there's a formal learning up to 21, 22 for most people. And then there's another formal learning when you're in your 50s or 60s. And maybe there are regular updates. Anyway, the whole system,
what's happening,
to catch up. Yeah, to keep on top.
Yeah.
Just to tread water for many people.
There's a lot of stuff going on you cannot follow. At one point, it's just going to be there, right? And then I have to comprehend whatever that means for my way of structuring the world around me and my own future and my safety and my children and all these things. But it's going to be like here. It's not going to be like the tsunami in the distance, if that makes sense, right? It's going to be very hard when it's like in your face to... Are you following like where I want to go?
Yeah. The tsunami's coming in hot.
It will shatter your paradigm. So how do you think people can protect or at least prepare for that future?
I think there are some very practical ways, and there are some ways that are perhaps less obvious and maybe thought experiments for people. So let's talk about both. In practical terms, there is an enormous amount. I mean, forget the academic literature. The academic literature in AI is vast. In Bitcoin and Web 3.0 and crypto, it's a lot newer, and academics take a while to catch up, many of them. There's some good material out there, but there's a lot less of it in terms of volume. The good news there is you can read it and get across it in a shorter time frame. But for most people, the academic papers are not going to be where it's at. For most people, it's going to be a case of consuming a distillation of that. And in fact, using the AI to explain AI, that's a good start. So, I say to people, whether you've got Grok or ChatGPT or Perplexity, whatever your AI might be in terms of your LLM, and that's another thing. AI isn't really LLM. That's how most people conceive of AI, but that's just one factor. But for a lot of people, it can start with getting on ChatGPT, for example, getting a subscription, get the best one that you can afford, and then ask the AI to explain AI. And then ask the AI to explain to you how to refine your prompts, because your prompts are going to help you learn really what the LLM can do, and then take you down the path. And then ask about the implications of AI for my industry. Ask about the implications of AI for my job and my present role. And you can feed in everything now into the AI, and you can have your own individual bots doing so many tasks and so many things that organize your life, and having an army of virtual assistants doing everything from your travel planning to your financial management to your meal planning to your social agenda to your workflow, productivity hacks, whatever it might be. So I think the obvious ways are read, get on YouTube, look at YouTube videos, look at videos on the internet. It doesn't have to be YouTube. Anything you can find. Listen to podcasts. So there are some really good podcasts. In fact, another friend of ours was on Richard Byler's podcast, Simon Gerovich, who's a friend of mine, who's done great things in the Bitcoin treasury space, and is very well known in the industry. He did two particular episodes that were just, I think, brilliant in explaining the fundamentals of how that works and the spillover effects of listening to the 2 half-hour episodes thereabouts that Simon did with Richard B on Bitcoin treasury management and Bitcoin generally, and how the new economy works. what was so great about them is Simon's a super smart guy who has the gift of explaining really complicated and difficult things in simple and accessible terms to everyone. So, I was with a bunch of teenagers shortly afterwards and was doing a seminar for them and said, go and listen to it. And about half of them did. And they'd messaged me afterwards and told me they'd listened to it and they'd learned an enormous amount. So anyway, the content is out there. It's not so hard to find. I think your podcast is a great start for many people. It's called Bitcoin for Millennials for a reason. You have a whole lot of, from what I've seen, a whole lot of people on who explain things in very clear and simple terms. And your curiosity shines through there. And that's really what people need, is they need to go and consume the material that's already out there. Generate material that's specific to them and use the AI to do that. And then the thought experiments. So one thing I do is, if I've got a free moment, whatever environment I'm in, I start to deconstruct the environment and think about, how will this environment change once AI, once new economy, once Web 3.0 really hits? How many of these people that I was in a food court in Dubai, and I did this as a thought experiment with the person I was with, because they said to me, explain the impact of AI for me. And I'd said to them, well, rather than talk about you and your particular role to begin with, let's take a look around. So we took a look around the food court, the shopping mall. It was in one of those mega malls in Dubai. And, at the end of it, the person was horrified by thinking, that's exactly what is going to happen, and that's precisely right. These people are all going to be gone in this time frame, and those roles and those tasks are all going to evaporate. And so then the question is, well, what do they do? Where do they go? And how do they prepare for that? Because if if you're working for a call center now, it's goodbye, because agentic AI is already phenomenal. Agentic AI has latency, like practically zero latency. I mean, I've had conversations with agentic AI, interactions with agentic AI in China recently, and you'd be almost impossible to separate my conversation with the agentic AI from a conversation you and I are having right now.
Yeah, that's
in fact, one of the differences, the reaction of the AI is quicker to me or to you in conversation than I am in talking to you, because the process and the speed is faster. So, people working in a call center now, it's time to think about what's next, because the call center job might last another year, but then after that, you're going to have to find something else to do. So start training up and skilling and thinking about your industry and what you're doing and how that's going to change.
To tie that back to something we said a bit earlier in the beginning, to be fair, a lot of people are just doing what they are doing in life, right? They work at that call center to provide for themselves or their family, and they don't really have time or space or the awareness of the fact that there is even a tsunami starting on the horizon. So I hear what you're saying. I just think like this like I'm a bit, I don't know how you look at the future, but I'm a bit with regard to AI, I'm a bit more pessimistic in the sense that for sure a large amount, probably the majority of people won't be confronted with it or triggered by it until it's like really against their face. And I'm not really sure how people can process that paradigm shift, basically, and so I don't know what that looks like, but I'm not really positive about it in the sense that I mean, obviously, I look a lot at the money and the money being broken, and the fact that I am just amazed by the fact that people don't start looking at the problem there, right? When they go to the supermarket just to have a quick dinner, and it's like $40 or euros or whatever, and they're realizing, I have to work more hours for the same amount of food that I bought 5 years ago, something like that, or however someone perceives that problem. And they're still not doing anything about it, right? They're still not looking for alternative solutions like, Bitcoin. So I think that AI paradigm shift is probably even more confrontational. So I'm not necessarily optimistic about that. I do think that Bitcoin is something that can help you protect against that, let's call it the shock period, where everything is changing. People will be losing jobs, will be losing their sense of maybe even belonging, right? Like, okay, what's my place in the world? I used my intellect in these ways to provide for my my financial prosperity, right? And that is gone because the computer replaced me. I think people need time to adjust, and that's why I connect AI to Bitcoin, in the sense that I think that when you save in Bitcoin, whatever you have right now, you can actually use that as protection for this time of chaos, to then figure out, okay, what comes after that, like you said, right? Like what comes after that. So that's kind of how I kind of view it.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's protect for the future in the ways that you can. And the reality is that a lot of people are overwhelmed, as we've discussed. So if you're overwhelmed and you're time poor and you've got life, and life is busy and your job is taking a lot of time and attention, the way to begin, I think, is to focus on what you do now and block out all of the other AI noise around what's happening at a macro level and at a bigger picture level to society and to the world as a whole and geopolitically, and focus about the job you're doing today and how AI is likely to impact that on a 5-10 year time frame and beyond, and then prepare for that change in advance of that change happening. Because it's not like the jobs are going to disappear overnight. It's not like the roles are going to change instantaneously, but they're going to change very quickly.
Yeah.
And the changes are going to be unexpected for many people, as we've discussed. But the way that people can prepare is to spend some time, and it may just be an hour a week or an hour every couple of weeks, using the AI to help you think through. And I say use the AI because you'll become experienced in using the AI. And when you're facile with the AI, you become better at using it and you get more out of it. But also your efficiency and productivity will go up. And the more people use the AI, the more they incorporate it into their existing lives, and the more that becomes a demonstration of their value in their existing role and their existing life in terms of productivity and what value they can add to somebody else, whether it be their employer or in a relationship. So they're more likely to embrace the AI and use the AI, but start to research and think about the impact on the role you're doing today, and then think about how what you need to learn, what skills you need to develop to evolve that role so that it's relevant into the future. And for a lot of people, that'll be enough, but people need to do that.
So if AI basically enables abundance, in the sense that, at least that's how I view it, any concept, any idea, any digital product, eventually also I'd say any physical product can be copied, reverse engineered, and whenever the concept is out into the world, I tried that with a few ideas, that a few new concepts that I saw. I just used AI to see, okay, if I want to do that thing too, how should I do that, right? And then I used the AI to reverse engineer back to the core of that idea, right? So how can I steal this concept? I think that is something that will only accelerate, and in that sense, it'll bring a sort of abundance where no idea really is unique anymore. We can basically create everything. How important are things that are scarce in a future like that? When we have abundance, how do we even value the abundance, or like what is value anymore? This is of course where I kind of see Bitcoin come in, but I do think that a lot of modern economists don't really, maybe except for gold, right? Especially currently, they say like, oh, gold is scarce. But it's a scarce thing that protects against a certain problem. Obviously, that's what Bitcoin does too. But then when we think about the future where, there's just infinite stuff that can be created, how do we even value things? I think for me, that's also where Bitcoin comes in as being a better measurement for value than gold, because it's absolutely scarce, etc. Yep. How do you think about that? Like, what if we have this abundant future? How do we value things? What is value?
Supply and demand won't change, but the types of supply and demand are likely to change. So when I say supply and demand won't change, in terms of that equilibrium, that model that most people learn in high school economics, where you're looking at, if demand exceeds supply, what happens, and where does supply and demand come from? That understanding. Yep. So that basic model isn't going to change, but the drivers of demand and the sources of supply and the mechanics around that's all going to change, and it's changing. It's changing now. The real question, I think, is, in an abundant world, what do you value? What is scarce in an abundant world? And there will be things that are scarce. Well, if Elon gets us to Mars and we've got interplanetary travel and we can harvest, if we can harvest things from outer space, then that's a game changer, of course, and there's a whole lot that can be read there. But that aside, if we're here and now, thinking about scarcity and what's likely to be scarce and how that impacts value is a very interesting question. And Bitcoin, what really stands that apart from most other coins, of course, is scarcity, immutability. I think the adoption less so. I think the reason that Bitcoin's been adopted more than other coins is because scarcity is the key feature. So as a store of value, it's seen as being the one that is separated from the rest and is likely to endure for that reason. But the key question is really going to be, in a world of abundance, how do you spend your time, and where do you get value from, and where does your relevance come from? So for a lot of people, that's going to be an existential question. What's my purpose, and how do I spend? Because if we went to a model of UBI, right, I've written about universal basic income and variants thereof and what impact they may have on society. Let's imagine there was a wholesale adoption of UBI in a particular nation. The question then becomes, what do the people do? And if you've got unlimited time and you've got sufficient funds to meet your needs, then what? How do you spend the time? You can spend it wisely, you can spend it unwisely, you can spend it in ways that are productive or socially value accretive, and in ways that destroy society. So these are the really big
today,
questions.
Also, right?
Like today. But it becomes an even more pressing problem into the future. It's more pernicious when you have complete abundance, and also when you've got the AI that is smarter than any human on Earth and quicker and faster than any human on Earth. In fact, is faster than and smarter than an aggregation of the smartest, than an entire profession on Earth, and is like that, right? Yeah. What happens then? And that's where we're headed.
All right, my last two questions. You've done a lot of policy advising. How has that experience influenced your thinking about any regulatory approaches for AI and Bitcoin, in the sense that I can also imagine that the policy part again goes slower than the actual manifestation of the technology in the reality part, right? So how is that needed or not?
Regulation is...
I don't really have a opinion. I just wonder, because a lot of people talk about regulation and policies and stuff like that, but at some point, stuff just happens. I mean, there's still people that are debating certain policies about stuff being done on the internet. That would then be my illustration there, right? Like,
sure.
Yeah, people just do stuff. So there's always this, from some people, need for more policy. But I just wonder what you think.
Okay, so we need regulation to protect us all. But it's a matter of how much regulation and how well functioning those regulations are, and the regulatory framework is. Mm-hmm. It's absolutely the case that for most technologies and for most of the new financial system, the technology, the people in it are way ahead of the regulators. and the regulators are playing catch up, or are playing stop the innovation, or hold it back, right? Hold it back, restrain the innovation.
Yeah.
Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I think in some cases it's a bad thing. In some cases it's a good thing, and people can debate and do debate forever and a day as to why that's the case. What the real conundrum for me is when I think through regulation at a national level, the more we move to systems that are globally integrated or that don't rely on institutions and nations in terms of the new economy, in terms of, take Bitcoin, what do the regulations at a national level do? What they do is they create regulatory arbitrage. And the regulatory arbitrage just means there's an ability for someone to profit at somebody else's expense. So countries that might regulate out a technology or regulate out a system suffer the problem, I think, that it'll just shift elsewhere. It's not going to stop it, and it's probably not going to hold it back. And I think this understanding is really shining through some of the changes in policy changes in both leading economies in the world, both in the US and in China, in terms of how they're embracing the new technology and trying to shape it and think about it. Because regulation only works in that world when you have transnational regulation, and transnational regulation doesn't work and hasn't worked. And the UN was an attempt in some ways at bringing about transnational regulation, or at least transnational agreement and cooperation, and it's failed in my estimation, and in many people who study that far more than I do in their estimation too. Then the recourse becomes, or the fallback thinking is, well, it's failed, but what would be better? And that's not my area to think about what would be better than the UN, but there's got to be something better that works better. But anyway, in terms of regulation, the regulations are absolutely holding back the technology. I mean, I see things in AI. I walk out of research labs. I'm often there with a business partner or somebody that I might be doing some work with. And, we have the experience where we look at each other and shake our heads. And occasionally you get the feeling of, are we the only two people outside that lab, and maybe a handful of others that actually saw that and know that's how advanced it already is? It already is. It's already there. People are writing about it. I'm reading the newspaper that's going to happen in 2 years or in 5 years, maybe. It's already there.
Thanks for sharing that. Thanks so much for your time. I really enjoyed it. And I hope people found this conversation valuable. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, you can click here to find more just like it, and click here to find all Bitcoin for Millennials podcast episodes. Also, please like this video if you want to help shine a light on the message of Bitcoin, and subscribe to my channel to stay connected. I hope to see you for a next episode. Bye.